Hey, it's your guy Tyrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down how Real Madrid were able to comfortably defeat Ibar and get back to winning ways in La Liga. When we break it all down, what we end up seeing here is Real Madrid in a 4-3-3 with Eden Hazard and Rodrigo out in those wider areas. What we should identify here is how Real Madrid's overall base shape was. So what you ended up seeing was that initially you had the center backs splitting out into those wider areas, and that would see them get 2v1 against Kike Garcia. Toni Kroos was dropping off deeper in the earlier stages trying to get on the ball. That would see Casemiro push a bit forward, and Luka Modric wasn't really varying his movement in those stages. What you also ended up seeing here was the importance of Real Madrid's left-hand side. Orellana wasn't tracking the movement of Marcelo, so Marcelo was constantly able to push forward ahead of Robert. What you saw from the left-hand side was Hazard would shift into that zone, but if Marcelo was looking to push forward, you would see Hazard drift centrally, at times adopting positions ahead of Oliveira, and there were also times where he was between both center backs. When that would happen, that obviously leaves a gap in that left channel, and there were times throughout that game where we'd see initially Kroos drop off into that zone to protect that space, or we would see Casemiro drop into that zone to protect the space. Over on the right hand side, Rodrigo would be holding the width, and you would see Carvajal looking to move into narrow positions, and there were times where Rodrigo dropped off a bit deeper so Carvajal could push forward to try and get into advanced areas beyond De Blasis. But what you end up seeing from Real Madrid here was that they got into good positions based off the movement of Benzema and Hazard, and the fact that their midfield was combative in those zones, winning challenges and allowing Real Madrid to break freely. They didn't create an ample amount of chances in that opening half, but when they did get into good positions, they were efficient in the final third, and that was how they were able to get a 3-goal lead ahead of halftime. What was also important about Real Madrid was their positioning without the ball. You would see Benzema look to press one of the center backs on the ball, and then Kroos and Modric did a very good job of stepping to the spare man if it was on their side. What you should see here is that they should be stepping into the path of the double pivot, but what ended up happening was that we ended up seeing them gamble with Kroos predominantly helping Benzema press from the front, and Casemiro should be shifting into that zone to pick up the spare man. Modric did the same thing with Arbia when he did look to push forward, but what was key was that when Ibar tried to play passes throughout the back, Kroos, Modric, and Casemiro were able to win those loose balls, and then what ended up happening was that they looked to play in Real Madrid's front three as they broke into the gaps beyond the Ibar defense. You ended up seeing the Ibar fullbacks pushing higher up the pitch, so that created gaps in those channels for Real Madrid's attacking players to break into. What should also be noted here was that 4-2-3-1 at times did look like a 4-3-3 because Exposito was dropping off a bit deeper to get on the ball before receiving it, playing to a teammate, and then pushing forward. And there was also times where Cristoforo was pushing a bit more higher than Exposito to try and get on the ball and provide a bit of support for Kike. So when we break down the key moments in that opening half, we're able to witness the three key elements to Real Madrid's success. It ended up seeing the attacking players breaking in behind that Ibar defense, the movement of Benzema and Eden Hazard, and the fact that the midfield trio were winning that battle in that central area. Even when we look to Real Madrid's opening goal, yes, it was a moment of brilliance from Toni Kroos, but we end up seeing key elements in the build-up. It starts with Casemiro winning the loose ball ahead of Exposito and playing it to the right of Alvarez for Eden Hazard dropping off into that zone. Marcelo is high ahead of Robert, so that takes him out of position. And when Hazard receives that ball, he holds off Alvarez's press. He ends up cutting across him, but before Exposito can step in, he drops it off to the free Casemiro, who plays a first-time pass into Benzema, drifting into that vacant space in that left channel. So when Benzema receives the ball in that left channel, he's closed down by Robert and Cristoforo, and you have Hazard drifting into that space, dragging out Alvarez. From that buildup, yes, Benzema doesn't beat his two men, but the ball ends up falling to Cruz, and that's how he's able to score the opener. But if Casemiro doesn't win that loose ball, if Hazard doesn't drift out of position to pull markers towards him, and if Benzema doesn't drift into that zone, then that opening goal isn't scored. So you see Casemiro winning the ball, you see the movement of Benzema and Hazard, and that was key. When we look to a few other examples, we witnessed that Real Madrid's dominance in the center of the pitch resulted in them getting opportunities to play in the attacking three in transition. When we look to one example, we have Cruz stepping towards Alvarez, Modric near Exposito, and then you have Arbia being able to push forward as no one's stepping towards him. Arbia tries to play an advanced pass into Cristoforo, but Casemiro steps into that challenge and ends up nodding it to Modric, and he instantly locates Hazard darting into space between Robert and Oliveira and tries to clip the ball over the top for Hazard, but slightly overhit. Once Modric got on that ball, you ended up seeing that front three break into the gaps. You had Hazard breaking in between Robert and Oliveira, you had Benzema breaking in between Oliveira and Arbia, and then you ended up seeing Rodrigo breaking in between Arbia and Rafa, trying to get into attacking zones beyond that Ibar defense. Seconds later, you end up seeing Cristoforo dropping off deeper to receive that ball in midfield, and he ends up pushing forward, and Modric ends up leaving Exposito to make a sliding tackle to win the ball. Casemiro picks up the loose ball and ends up splitting Alvarez and Exposito to find Benzema dropping off a bit deeper, and Benzema ends up playing the ball back into Modric, who squares it to Cruz, and then Cruz locates Rodrigo making a run, and he clips the ball in between Rafa and Arbia to try and meet Rodrigo, but it's slightly overhit. And when we look to one final example of Real Madrid looking to break swiftly beyond that Ibar defense, it stems from Robert winning a loose ball over Marcelo into Sergio Ramos, and when Ramos receives that ball, he ends up locating Hazard darting into space between Rafa and Arbia and tries to play that long ball over the top, but Arbia does get ahead of it to nod danger away. But as you can see, Ibar couldn't find a way through those midfield zones because Casemiro, Cruz, and Modric were doing a good job winning challenges and applying pressure. And when Madrid won that ball, they were instantly looking for their teammates breaking in behind to try and get them into good goal scoring positions. Then we get back to the movement of Benzema and Hazard, which capped off the final goals. What we end up seeing here in the build-up to the second goal is that Arbia is pushing forward in towards Madrid's half, and that's when you finally see Luka Modric step into his path. When we look at Ibar's overall shape then, you have Orellana moving into the path of Varane, you have Kike near Sergio Ramos, and you have De Blasis ahead of Carvajal. You also end up seeing Rafa push forward in beyond Hazard, who was on the right-hand side, and then you have Robert pushing ahead of Rodrigo down the left. So when Arbia plays that pass into Kike, you end up seeing Sergio Ramos step in. Once Ramos wins that ball, Hazard's instantly breaking beyond Exposito, who is ahead of him, into that right channel. When Ramos does get onto that ball, he slides it out to Benzema, drifting into space in beyond Robert. So now you have Benzema breaking forward from the left channel. You have Ramos running in beyond Cristoforo. So when Benzema receives that ball in that left channel, he's able to cut across Oliveira and the recovering Robert to split Cristoforo and Arbia for Eden Hazard breaking into right half space. And that's when Hazard ends up squaring it into the path of Ramos, continuing his run from his own box to tap in the effort to put Real Madrid up 2-0. And when you look to the third goal, yes, it was a great finish from Marcelo, but the build-up does involve those key elements once again. Madrid's midfield winning possession, and then the movement of Benzema and Hazard that terrified Ibar throughout. It starts with Cruz winning the ball off Cristoforo and playing it into the path of Rodrigo running across Robert, and he's able to play the ball across Robert into the path of Benzema, dropping into his own half to pull out Oliveira. What you end up seeing from Benzema there is that he ends up switching the ball out to Eden Hazard, and Hazard's able to nod the ball over Rafa into the path of Carvajal running off De Blasis. What you see there is that De Blasis and Rafa do a good job of recovering and closing down Carvajal, but he ends up dropping the ball off to Hazard, and Hazard wraps it around De Blasis to find Benzema making a darting run in between Arbia and Rafa. Now what ends up happening here is that Benzema does a very good job of holding off Arbia and Rafa by turning central, and he ends up playing the ball in between both and across Esposito for Eden Hazard, running off Esposito into right half space. When Hazard breaks off into right half space, he opts to not run across Oliveira, and he ends up staying wide and firing a tame effort on goal that is pushed away. Nevertheless, although it is Alvarez clearing the ball out to Marcelo, in that overall build-up, Cruz winning the ball, you have Benzema dropping off deeper to pull out a defender, and Benzema and Hazard single-handedly bypass that Ibar defense to get themselves into a good goal-scoring position, and once again, Zidane's men were effective and efficient when they got into that box. But when you break down that game as a whole, Real Madrid killed it off in the opening half. When you look at the key elements to their win, it's very simple. They were able to break swiftly in transition, and they were effective and efficient in the box. Cruz, Modric, and Casemiro won the midfield battle over Cristoforo, Alvarez, and Esposito, and the movement of Benzema and Hazard dominated that Ibar side from back to front. When you look at Real Madrid's overall defensive shape, they were rarely tested until that second half when they made changes and were up 3-0. But overall in that opening half, yes, they didn't create an ample amount of chances, but those key elements helped them get into good goal scoring positions, and they were able to make the most of it as they keep pace with Barcelona at the top of La Liga. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the interview show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the Interviews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.